The diplomatic vessel Eternal Vigilance hung motionless against the backdrop of Earth's orbital defense grid. Inside, Ambassador Taz gripped the edge of the viewing panel, his knuckles white with tension. The blue-green planet below seemed peaceful, unaware of the cosmic horrors that kept the rest of the galaxy's civilizations in constant fear. "They'd built so much, so quickly," he whispered to his aide, Ji Wu. 14 colonies in just 70 years, Ji Wu responded, scrolling through data on her tablet. And no regard for the danger zones. Tai Sung's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep worry among his kind. He had represented the concordat of species in 17 first contact scenarios, but never had he encountered a civilization so blissfully ignorant of the cosmos' greatest terror. The humans had expanded into regions where no sensible species would tread, claiming star systems that lay dangerously close to recorded shroud activity. Their nearest colony, Proxima Centauri, sits at the edge of the whispering void. Ji Wu continued. Any concordat species would have evacuated that sector centuries ago. Perhaps they cannot detect it, Tai Sung suggested, his gray skin flushing slightly purple with anxiety. Their technology is young. Ji Wu checked her readings again. No, they have the capability. They simply do not understand what they are seeing. The ship's alert system chimed softly. The human delegation was approaching in their shuttle. Tai Sung straightened his ceremonial robes and prepared for what might be the most important diplomatic meeting of his long career. If he failed to convince these humans of the danger, their entire species, and possibly others, could be lost to the Shroud's hunger. When the human delegation boarded, led by Admiral Park, Tai Sung wasted no time on pleasantries. The Admiral was a stern-faced woman with short black hair streaked with gray. With her were 3 others, a military officer, a scientist, and what appeared to be a government official. "Your species has been fortunate," Tai Sung said, activating the holographic display in the center of the meeting chamber. "But fortune will not protect you from the Shroud." As the projection filled with darkness that seemed to consume the stars themselves, Tai Sung watched the humans' faces. Where he expected fear, he saw only curiosity. The scientist even leaned forward with interest, adjusting her glasses as she studied the swirling patterns of nothingness. "What exactly are we looking at, Ambassador?" Admiral Park asked, her voice calm and measured. "The end of worlds," Tai Sung replied solemnly. "The Shroud has consumed 17 known civilizations in our recorded history. It comes without warning, engulfs entire star systems, and leaves nothing behind." The scientist, Dr. He Jin, according to her nameplate, tapped something into her device. "This looks similar to the quantum anomalies we've been tracking in the Cygnus arm." Tai Sung and Ji Wu exchanged alarmed glances. "You've observed the Shroud?" Ji Wu asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what you call these spatial distortions, yes," Dr. He Jin replied. "We've been studying them for decades. Fascinating phenomenon. We've even sent probes into the peripheral zones." A small whimper escaped Tai Sung's throat before he could compose himself. The humans had not only seen the Shroud, they had deliberately approached it. No wonder the Concordat's long-range sensors had detected unusual activity in this sector. It wasn't the Shroud expanding. It was humans poking at it like curious children with a sleeping predator. "Dr. He Jin," Tai Sung said carefully, "what you call spatial distortions are manifestations of an entity that has destroyed entire galactic civilizations. The Jirai Empire stood for 12,000 years before the Shroud took their homeworld, and every colony in a single rotation cycle." He gestured, and the hologram shifted to show recordings of a beautiful ringed planet surrounded by orbital cities, then darkness sweeping across it, leaving only empty space. "This was Terith Prime, just 200 cycles ago," Ji Wu added. "Billions of lives, gone in moments." The government official, a man named Secretary Kyung, frowned deeply. "If this threat is real, why hasn't the Concordat attempted to destroy it or contain it?" Tai Sung blinked all 4 eyes simultaneously, the equivalent of a bitter laugh. Destroy it? One might as well try to destroy gravity or time. The shroud exists beyond our understanding of physics. We can only track its movements and stay far from its path. Admiral Park remained composed, but her fingers tapped rhythmically on the table. And you believe Earth and our colonies are in its path? Not yet, Tai-Sung said, but your expansion pattern is alarming. 3 of your planned colony sites are in sectors where the shroud has been active within the last millennium. That is like building a home where wildfire has just passed, not understanding that the fire returns in cycles. Dr. He-Jin was reviewing her own data, comparing it to the Concordat's information. Our readings suggest these anomalies follow predictable patterns. If they're dangerous, we could simply map safe corridors for expansion. Jai-Woo shook her head. Many thought as you do. The patterns seem predictable until they are not. The shroud changes. It learns. It adapts. The military officer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. You speak of this shroud as if it's intelligent. We do not know what it is, Tai-Sung admitted. Some believe it is a natural phenomenon, like your black holes. Others think it may be a weapon left by those who came before any of our civilizations. Some religious factions believe it is a cosmic cleansing force, removing those deemed unworthy of the stars. He leaned forward, his 4-fingered hands splayed on the table. What we do know is that it brings only destruction, and that your species is venturing into its hunting grounds with no regard for the danger. Admiral Park exchanged glances with her team. We appreciate the warning, Ambassador. We'll need to review your data before making any policy changes regarding our expansion efforts. Tai-Sung felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He recognized diplomatic speak when he heard it. The humans were being polite, but they didn't truly believe. How could they? They had not seen what he had seen. Entire civilizations vanishing into that terrible darkness. As the meeting continued, with the humans asking technical questions that missed the point entirely, Tai-Sung realized that saving this young species would require more than warnings. He would need to show them, somehow, what the shroud truly was. And he would need to do it before the darkness noticed their reckless curiosity. Dr. Yunji slid her cup of coffee across the conference table as the alien ambassador's warnings grew increasingly dire. The black liquid rippled slightly, mirroring the tension in the room. 3 days had passed since the initial contact with Ambassador Tai-Sung, and the Emergency Scientific Council had been in session for nearly 14 hours straight. With all due respect, Ambassador Tai-Sung, she said, her voice calm despite her fatigue, we've detected these spatial anomalies for decades. Our probes have mapped them extensively. The ambassador's facial tentacles twitched with alarm. The 4 fleshy appendages around his mouth area rippled in a way that the human scientists had quickly learned indicated extreme distress. You've sent probes toward the shroud. His voice rose in pitch, and several of the Concordat aides behind him made clicking sounds that needed no translation to be understood as expressions of horror. Dr. Yunji exchanged glances with Admiral Park, who sat at the head of the table, her face impassive. The Admiral gave a slight nod, permitting the scientist to continue. Not only probes, Dr. Yunji said, pulling up a holographic display. We've been studying these phenomena since we first detected them near the outer rim of our solar system in 2089. We call them gravity wells. Across the room, Hyun Ki, Earth's foremost quantum physicist, pulled up his own data. His fingers moved quickly across the interface, bringing up charts and 3-dimensional models that hovered in the air. We've recorded 17 events that match your shroud description. Each followed predictable gravitational patterns, he explained, highlighting a sequence that showed the spread of darkness followed by a contraction. Look here and here. The pattern repeats with only 0.03% variation. Tai-Sung exchanged troubled looks with his aide, Ji-Woo. The 2 aliens' skin had taken on a pale bluish tint that hadn't been present during their initial meeting. 5 civilizations, Tai-Sung said solemnly, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 entire species consumed in my lifetime alone. The Mikari, the Trelf, the Vosper Confederacy. None believed until it was too late. He pressed a sequence on his wrist device, and the room's main display changed. The human images vanish, replaced by historical records from the Concordat archives. The footage showed a beautiful ringed planet, much like Saturn but with an emerald hue, surrounded by thousands of orbital habitats. The Mikari homeworld, Jia Wu explained. Population of 11 billion. The footage continued. A shadow appeared at the edge of the system. At first, it seemed like a normal eclipse or passing body, but as it moved, stars behind it didn't reappear. The darkness spread, not like a solid object moving through space, but like ink in water, tendrils reaching outward in all directions. Within minutes of footage, the entire planet and its orbital structures were engulfed. When the darkness receded, there was nothing left but empty space where a thriving civilization had been. The room fell silent. Admiral Park's composed expression finally cracked, her eyes widening slightly. Dr. Yunji felt her mouth go dry as the ambassador played similar footage from 4 other worlds. As he displayed the historical records, entire star systems vanishing into impossible darkness, a chill finally settled over the human delegation. The defense minister, who had been skeptical throughout the meetings, now sat rigid in his chair. The economic advisor had gone pale, likely calculating the implications for human expansion plans. All except Dr. Yunji, whose eyes narrowed as she studied the footage. "Those aren't random consumption patterns," she murmured. "There's structure there." She stood up suddenly, walking closer to the main display. "Can you slow down the Trelf footage and enhance the leading edge of the anomaly?" Tai Sung looked confused but complied. The footage slowed to 1/10 speed, showing the darkness consuming the system of 3 inhabited planets. "There," Dr. Yunji pointed. "The tendrils don't move randomly. They follow the electromagnetic fields of the planets. And look at this section here. It pulled back when it encountered that gas giant's radiation belt." Hyun-Ki joined her at the display, his eyes widening. "She's right. The pattern matches our gravity well prediction models. Ambassador, has anyone in the Concordat analyzed the mathematical structure of these events?" Tai Sung's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "We avoid studying the shroud too closely. Those who do often attract its attention." Dr. Yunji turned to face the alien delegation. "We've been studying similar phenomena for over 70 years without incident. Our deep space telescopes have mapped the boundaries and movements. We've even sent automated probes to collect data from the peripheral zones, and none have been lost." Ji Woo asked, her voice heavy with disbelief. 3 were lost," Admiral Park interjected, "but 17 returned with complete data sets." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The human delegates seemed to draw strength from this information, while the aliens appeared increasingly disturbed. Dr. Yunji returned to her seat and pulled up her personal research files. "I've been analyzing these events since I was a graduate student. The patterns aren't random destruction. They're too structured. There are repeating sequences in how the darkness moves." Hyun-Ki nodded in agreement. "We've detected quantum signatures that suggest the phenomena might exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously." Tai Sung's tentacles lay flat against his face now, a sign they had learned indicated deep concern. "You speak of the devourer of worlds as if it's a puzzle to be solved rather than a horror to be fled. Perhaps that's exactly why humanity hasn't attracted its attention," Dr. Yunji suggested. "We don't fear it, we study it." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with sudden inspiration. "What if the shroud isn't a predator at all? What if it's something entirely different, and our understanding, or lack thereof, determines how it interacts with us?" The meeting room erupted into multiple conversations. The defense minister argued for caution, while the science director sided with Dr. Yunji's approach. Admiral Park remained silent, watching the aliens' reactions carefully. Through the chaos, Dr. Yunji continued studying the footage, frame by frame. There was something there, a pattern within the pattern, a structure that nagged at the edges of her understanding. If she could just see it clearly. "We need to establish a dedicated research station," she announced suddenly, silencing the room. "Not just passive observation, but active study. And we need to share data with the Concordat." "That would be unprecedented," Tai Sung said slowly. "No species has ever willingly approached the Shroud." "Perhaps that's been the mistake all along," Dr. Yunji replied. "Fear has limited your understanding. We offer a different approach." As the meeting continued late into the night, Dr. Yunji couldn't shake the feeling that they stood at the edge of a monumental discovery, one that might redefine humanity's place in the cosmos if they were brave enough to reach for it. Dr. Yunji's laboratory aboard the research vessel Prometheus hummed with activity. 3 months had passed since the Concordat's warning, and humanity had responded not with retreat, but with their most ambitious scientific expedition yet. The ship's engines pulsed with a steady rhythm as it maintained position at the very edge of what the galactic community called forbidden space. Through the reinforced observation window, the stars seemed to thin out, giving way to a darkness that was somehow deeper than the usual void of space. Dr. Yunji had been staring at that darkness for hours, barely blinking, her reflection ghostly in the thick glass. "Doctor, the new sensor readings are ready," said Minho, her assistant, placing a tablet beside her cold cup of tea. She nodded without looking away from the window. "Add them to the pattern recognition algorithm." Version 7. Captain Du-hyun entered the laboratory, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. The ship had been on high alert since they'd arrived in this sector 3 days ago. The Concordat observers assigned to the mission had barely left their quarters, performing private rituals that their translator devices politely refused to explain. "The Admiral is asking for an update," the captain said. "The Concordat representatives are demanding we pull back immediately. They're saying we've gone too far already." Dr. Yunji finally turned from the window. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of too little sleep and too much stimulant tea. She gestured to the main display that dominated the center of the lab. "The aliens perceive it as chaos because of their neurological structure," she explained to Captain Do-hyun. "But human brains process these quantum signatures differently." On the massive display, swirling patterns of darkness flowed and shifted. What had appeared as random, terrifying destruction in the Concordat's historical footage now resolved into something else entirely. Complex, repeating patterns that pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "I don't understand," the captain admitted, staring at the display. "It just looks like waves to me." "That's because you're seeing it naturally," Dr. Yunji said. "Your brain isn't trying to force it into a framework of danger. The Concordat species evolved as prey animals. Most have defensive evolutionary adaptations. Their brains are wired to detect threats." She tapped on her tablet, and the display changed to show brain scans. When we showed Ambassador Tae-sung these same patterns, his threat detection neural pathways lit up immediately. It triggered an ancient fear response. Su Bin, the team's linguistics expert, joined them. She had been working nonstop since they'd arrived, running the pattern data through every communication algorithm Earth had developed. "It's trying to communicate," Su Bin said, her voice soft with wonder. "These aren't attacks. They're attempts at contact." Captain Do-hyun looked skeptical. "You're telling me this thing that supposedly destroyed entire civilizations is just saying hello?" "Not exactly," Dr. Yunji corrected. "Think of it like this. Imagine a 3-dimensional being trying to interact with a 2-dimensional plane. Any contact would seem catastrophic to the flat beings, even if the 3D entity was being gentle." She brought up another display. "We believe the Shroud exists in at least 11 dimensions. Its attempts to touch our reality appear destructive because we can only perceive a fraction of its true nature." "Like shadows on a wall," Su Bin added. Their vessel hovered at the edge of what the Concordat called forbidden space. Instruments extended toward the darkness between stars. The asterisk Prometheus asterisk had been designed specifically for this mission, equipped with sensors that could detect quantum fluctuations beyond anything previously built. "What about the destroyed civilizations?" Captain Du-hyun asked. "The Concordat records clearly show planets and stars vanishing." Dr. Yunji's expression turned grim. "We've been reviewing those records carefully. The planets don't actually vanish, they shift phase. They're still there, just vibrating at a different frequency of reality. Like tuning to a different radio station," Minho suggested. "Exactly," Dr. Yunji nodded. "And we believe those shifts weren't intentional destruction. The entity was trying different methods of communication, adjusting its approach with each civilization." "So why hasn't it tried to communicate with humans yet?" the captain asked. Subin smiled. "Because we've been talking back." She brought up another display, showing the signal pattern they had been broadcasting into the void for the past 48 hours. It matched certain key elements of the Shroud's own patterns, but arranged in a mathematical sequence: prime numbers, the value of pi, simple binary code. "We're saying we understand you're trying to talk," Dr. Yunji explained. "At least, that's what we hope we're saying." The ship's sensors suddenly pinged with increased activity. Minho rushed to his station. "Something's happening. Quantum fluctuations increasing by 300%. When the anomaly appeared, alarms blared throughout the ship. A wave of darkness materialized directly ahead of them, spreading across the starfield like spilled ink. The Concordat observers on board began emergency evacuation protocols, their translator devices broadcasting panicked warnings as they rushed toward the escape pods. "It's here. The Devourer comes. All is lost." Captain Du-hyun's hand hovered over the emergency retreat controls, his training battling with his trust in the science team. "Hold position," Dr. Yunji commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "It's responding exactly as we predicted." The darkness continued to spread, but instead of engulfing the ship, it formed a swirling pattern before them, almost like a spiral galaxy but composed of pure void. The ship's sensors went wild, recording data faster than the computers could process it. Instead of fear, Dr. Yunji stared transfixed at her readings. "It's responding to our signals," she whispered. "It knows we're listening." Subin gasped as new patterns emerged on her linguistic analysis. "The patterns are changing. It's adapting to match our broadcast." One of the Concordat observers had remained behind, frozen in terror by the door. The alien's 4 eyes were wide, its skin pale with fear. How are you still alive?" it whispered. "The Shroud should have consumed you already." Dr. Yunji turned to face the alien, her eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. "Because we're not running away. For the first time in galactic history, someone is listening to what it's trying to say." As the darkness outside the ship continued to form increasingly complex patterns, Dr. Yunji's team worked frantically to decode them. They were on the edge of the greatest discovery in human history: contact with an entity that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional spacetime. And for the first time since it had encountered intelligent life, the entity that had been called the Shroud found beings who didn't flee in terror, but instead reached out with curiosity and understanding. The conversation had begun. The Babel array stretched across the lunar surface, its quantum receivers pointed toward the void. 6 months of construction, drawing on resources from all of Earth's colonies, had created humanity's greatest technological achievement. The massive installation covered nearly 30 square kilometers of the Moon's Sea of Tranquility, its silver and black components gleaming under Earth's reflected light. From the central control dome, Dr. Yunji could see the entire array through the panoramic windows. Thousands of quantum receivers arranged in precise mathematical patterns, all designed based on the communications they had received during the Prometheus expedition. The mission had nearly ended in disaster when the Concordat observers had attempted to forcibly disconnect the ship's systems, believing that humanity was dooming itself by responding to the Shroud. "The final calibration tests are complete," Subin reported, not looking up from her station. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. None of the core team had slept properly in days. In lunar orbit, the Concordat flotilla watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. They had come to prevent catastrophe, or bear witness to humanity's extinction. 27 ships from 17 different species, all maintaining a safe distance that their risk calculations deemed appropriate. They had sent increasingly desperate messages, first pleading, then threatening, and finally begging humanity to stop this madness. Ambassador Tazsung had been the only one to come down to the lunar surface. He stood now at the back of the control room, his 4 eyes blinking nervously, facial tentacles lying flat against his face. "You truly believe this will work?" he asked Dr. Yunji quietly. She nodded without turning. "The entity has been trying to communicate for millennia. It just needed someone who could listen properly. And if you're wrong, if the shroud is exactly what we have always feared," Dr. Yunji finally turned to face him, "then humanity will join the list of species it has consumed. But I don't believe that's what will happen today." The control room buzzed with activity as the final preparations were made. The array would focus and amplify the communication patterns they had developed, broadcasting them with enough power to reach across light years of space. If Dr. Yunji's theories were correct, the entity existed partially outside normal spacetime and would receive the message almost instantly, regardless of distance. Captain Du Hyun, now promoted to admiral for his role in the Prometheus mission, entered the control room. He nodded to Dr. Yunji. "The evacuation ships are standing by. Non-essential personnel have been moved to the far side of the moon." "No one needs to evacuate," Dr. Yunji said firmly. "But I understand the precaution." The Admiral's expression remained neutral. The Security Council insisted. "They support your work, Doctor, but they're not willing to risk all of humanity on one theory." Min-ho called over from his console. "Power systems at full capacity. Quantum stabilizers online." Su-bin added, "Translation matrix ready. All 18 communication protocols loaded." Dr. Yunji moved to the central platform, where a holographic display showed the status of the entire array. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. If she was wrong, this could indeed be humanity's last great achievement. If she was right, everything would change. "We're ready for transmission," Min-ho announced from his console. Dr. Yunji nodded, her hand steady despite the weight of the moment. "Begin the sequence." Min-ho pressed his palm against the activation plate. Throughout the array, quantum receivers shifted position, aligning themselves precisely. Energy surged through the system, building to levels that made the instruments spike. The array pulsed with energy, sending carefully modulated quantum signals into deep space, directed at the approaching edge of what had once been called the shroud. The transmission contained everything they had learned about the entity's communication patterns, combined with information about humanity, mathematical constants, simple biological diagrams, astronomical data about Earth and its solar system, and basic linguistic structures. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The control room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Ambassador Tazsung's breathing became audible, quick and shallow with fear. Then the sensors spiked. "Something's coming through," Min-ho shouted. Massive quantum fluctuations detected. Outside, through the control room windows, they could see darkness spreading across the stars. Not the frightening, all-consuming void of the Concordat recordings, but something more structured, waves of shadow that flowed and ebbed with clear patterns. The response came faster than anyone expected. A cascading wave of information that overwhelmed their systems momentarily before resolving into coherent patterns. Alarms blared as computers struggled to process the incoming data. "Filter out the auxiliary channels," Dr. Yunji ordered. "Focus on the primary communication band." Su-bin worked frantically at her station. "The translation matrix is at full capacity. There's so much information." On the main display, the incoming patterns began to resolve into recognizable structures. Not words or images exactly, but something between the two, concepts rendered in quantum fluctuations that the translation system slowly interpreted. Minho's voice faltered. It's responding in kind, and it's been trying to make contact for over 12,000 years. The translation system finally stabilized, rendering the entity's communication into text that appeared on the main screen, one character at a time. Asterisk at last. Someone who can see asterisk. The control room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Ambassador Ta-Sung stumbled backward, his legs giving out beneath him. An assistant caught him before he hit the floor. "Ask it what it is," Admiral Du-hyun said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Yunji nodded to Subin, who entered the query into the system. The array pulsed again, sending the question outward. The response came almost immediately. Asterisk I am Thojit. I am BETLEN. I AVWATCAHD the small brighty things. For AGES asterisk. It's referring to stars, Minho said. Or maybe civilizations. Dr. Yunji leaned forward. Ask it why it consumed the other species. After the question was sent, there was a longer pause before the response appeared. Asterisk consumed. No. Tried to tivo yushi. To speak. They affiliate. They feared. They could note ce my true shape across TADIMENSIONS asterisk. On the secondary displays, data continued to pour in. Complex mathematical formulas, diagrams of spatial relationships that human science had barely begun to theorize, concepts that defied easy translation. It's giving us everything, Subin said in awe. Knowledge about dimensions we haven't even discovered yet. Dr. Yunji turned to Ambassador Ta-Sung, who had regained his composure enough to stand. You see, it never meant harm. The species it encountered simply couldn't perceive it correctly. But the destroyed worlds, the ambassador began. Another message appeared on the screen. Asterisk not destroyed. Phase E shafted. I can re-2 RNTHEM asterisk. The control room fell silent again. Dr. Yunji's hands trembled slightly for the first time. It can bring them back, she whispered. All those civilizations you thought were lost. Ambassador Ta-Sung's four eyes widened. His facial tentacles extending in what they had learned was an expression of profound shock. How? He asked simply. Dr. Yunji turned back to the communication system. How would we help you return them? The entity's response filled the screen with complex diagrams and equations. Asterisk build this. I will juide. Together, we will bridge. The ADINESIONS asterisk. As the data continued to flow between humanity and the entity, Dr. Yunji realized that this was only the beginning. Humanity had not just avoided destruction. They had found perhaps the greatest teacher in the universe. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, civilizations thought lost forever waited to be found. 1 year later, representatives from 27 species gathered in Earth's orbital assembly. The massive space station named Convergence had been built specifically for this historic meeting. Its central chamber was designed to accommodate beings from worlds with different atmospheres, gravities, and biological needs. Once fearful civilizations now looked to humanity with reluctant admiration. Species that had avoided contact with Earth just months earlier now sent their highest leaders. The atmosphere buzzed with a mixture of excitement and lingering caution. Dr. Yunji stood at the center of the chamber on a raised platform. She looked different now, more confident, her eyes bright with purpose. The dark circles of exhaustion that had marked her face during the Babel Array project were gone, replaced by an expression of serene satisfaction. Ta-Sung stood beside her, no longer an ambassador but the Concordat's high mediator. His transformation had been even more dramatic. Where once his posture had conveyed constant anxiety, he now stood tall, his four eyes clear and focused, facial tentacles relaxed. One standard galactic year ago, many of you came to this system expecting to witness humanity's destruction. Dr. Yunji began, her voice carried by translators to all present. Some came to warn us, Others came simply to observe what you believed would be the end of yet another civilization at the hands of the Shroud. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Many representatives shifted uncomfortably. "Today, we gather not in fear, but in celebration and hope," she continued. "What we feared as the Shroud is actually a sentient entity existing across 11 dimensions. Its attempts to interact with our reality appeared destructive only because of our limited perception." Behind her, the visualization showed how the entity, now called the Luminary, had been attempting increasingly refined methods of communication, each mistaken for random destruction. The display showed star systems vanishing not into nothingness, but into brilliant patterns of dimensional shifting. "Humanity's unique neurological structure allowed us to perceive patterns others couldn't," she continued. "And now, with the Luminary's knowledge, we've developed technologies to bridge these perceptual gaps for all species." She gestured to Minho, who stood at a control console nearby. He activated a sequence, and from the ceiling of the chamber, a series of devices descended, simple-looking silver discs that hummed with energy. "These perception bridges will allow each of you to experience the Luminary as it truly exists, not as your evolutionary fear responses have conditioned you to see it." Some representatives backed away nervously. Others leaned forward with interest. Tai Sung stepped forward. "I was the first non-human to use this technology," he said, his translated voice strong and clear. "What I had feared my entire life as a devourer of worlds was revealed to be the most advanced intelligence we have ever encountered. An intelligence that has been trying, for millennia, to share its knowledge with us." From the back of the chamber, a small delegation approached. Their movements were halting, uncertain, as if they were still getting used to their physical forms. The delegation from the Vosper survivors, their once extinct civilization now slowly rebuilding with the Luminary's help. Their worlds hadn't been destroyed, merely shifted temporarily into adjacent dimensional spaces. "We existed for 300 years in what you might call a parallel dimension," the Vosper leader said, her translator rendering her musical language into words all could understand. "Time passed differently there. What seemed like destruction to the galaxy was transformation for us." She turned to Dr. Yunji with a gesture of deep respect. "Without humanity's willingness to listen rather than flee, we might have remained lost forever." Su Bin approached Dr. Yunji, carrying a device that resembled a small crystal globe. "The final calibrations are complete," she whispered. Dr. Yunji nodded and addressed the gathering again. "Today, the Luminary wishes to speak directly to all assembled species. For those who feel ready, the perception bridges will allow you to see its true form. For others, the translator will provide words you can understand." Some representatives hurriedly opted out, their evolutionary fear too deeply ingrained to overcome in one meeting. But most stayed, curiosity overcoming caution. As Dr. Yunji activated the new universal translator, the Luminary's presence filled the chamber, not as darkness, but as brilliant, multi-dimensional light. Where once there had been the terrifying void of the Shroud, now complex patterns of energy danced through the air, beautiful beyond description. For those using the perception bridges, the experience was even more profound. They could see the entity existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, a consciousness so vast and ancient that it made their most advanced civilizations seem like brief sparks in comparison. *URETINGs, to all thinking beings, the Luminary communicated, its thoughts translated perfectly for each species present. *COVOR, AGs, IHVWATCE, your worlds grow. For AGEs, I have tried to HHAR, my KNOWLEDG*. Images formed in the air, galaxies spiraling, dimensions folding into one another, realities that existed alongside their own. The humans were ETAE first to see me as I am. The entity continued. Minds, unbured in me fear. The evolution gave ye many of you. Alo do ed them to p or ceiv pay t urans others. Cooled in ot asterisk. The Concordat's supreme leader, a being of living crystal who had traveled from the galactic core for this meeting, stepped forward. What do you want from us? They asked, their voice still holding a tremor of ancient fear. Asterisk to share asterisk came the simple response. Asterisk to go teach, to learn. Your species, thank in ways I cannot. Together, we guarel xxp lori realities, beyond your imaging asterisk. The light shifted, forming into a diagram of the known galaxy, then expanding to show thousands more beyond. Asterisk, the cosmos holds no emory dread, only wondr asterisk. As the meeting continued, Dr. Yunji found a quiet moment with Thais on the way from the center of attention. Did you ever imagine this? She asked him. When you came to warn us about the terrible shroud. The alien's facial tentacles rippled in what she now recognized as his species' version of laughter. Never, he admitted. I came expecting to witness yet another tragedy. Instead, I found that fear had blinded my entire civilization for thousands of years. Fear does that, Dr. Yunji said softly. It makes monsters out of things we don't understand. Together, they watched as representatives from dozens of species cautiously began interacting with the luminary, asking questions, receiving answers that would transform their understanding of reality itself. Humanity's gift to the galaxy had not been technology or power, but something far simpler and more profound. The courage to listen when others could only run away. The end